The city of Porto has given its name to one of Portugal's greatest exports, port wine. But the drink has a rather fusty, old-fashioned image. In the last 20 years, sales of fortified wines have fallen dramatically. Here in Porto, one of the biggest port producers is trying to reverse that by combining the best traditions of the past with contemporary change. Treading the grapes. It's a process that hasn't changed for centuries. Every autumn, the grape pickers begin their work in the vineyards of the Douro Valley in northern Portugal. This year's port making has begun.
Port is a fortified wine made in the Douro Valley. The fermentation is stopped halfway through and fortified brandy is added, and then it requires aging here in the Porto in casks. This is a typical dark, rich port, and after 3 to 6 years in cask, it will be sold as a port.
The barrels of port remain on the quinta or estate for 6 months, after which they're taken down the river Douro, either by wooden bark or by lorry to Porto, where the wine is ultimately exported.
The wine of your enemy, because France and of course England were at war in those days, so the wine merchants were encouraged to come to Portugal to find a wine to replace that. And this dark, rich red wine was also able to stand the rigours of the journey back to the UK, across the Bay of Biscay, over the English Channel. And ironically, France has become a very big market for port. In fact, most of the port is now sold in Europe, England, France, Belgium, Holland. But the Americans and the Canadians are also important consumers.
Johnny Symington is the 4th generation of his family to work in the port industry. His company makes 20 million bottles of port a year under the Graham's, Dow's and War's labels. It's here in the lodges of Vila Nova de Gaia in Porto that the fortified wine is stored and matured for between 3 and 40 years. The Symington family controls 20% of the world's port trade. It's proud of its traditional port-making methods, but the company realises it needs to embrace new technology and to respond to the changing lifestyles of its European customers.
Like we say in Portuguese, saúde.
These British tourists don't need much persuading, but younger people do. Port's perceived as a heavy, old-fashioned drink, something to bring out only at Christmas.
The stereotype of a port drinker is the crusty English colonel sitting in his leather chair after lunch. But in fact, the good news for us is that port has a much wider appeal than just the people in their sort of retirement. It's nearly 50-50 in terms of ladies and men, and so we produced a bottle which was very contemporary in its design. It was light, transparent, you could see the colour of the wine, beautiful packaging, very, very elegant. We still tread grapes in the old traditional way of stamping them in the old tanks, but we've actually developed a unique way of making port, which is a robotic lagar. And I think this is probably the most technologically advanced system of winemaking in the world now. And I think as a family, although we have tradition and heritage and so on, it is absolutely essential if we're going to be here for future generations, which we believe we will, that we do keep up to date with technology, not only in vinification, but also in the viticulture, the vineyards, as well as, of course, marketing and modern commerce and distribution.
Well, that's all we've got time for in this month's Europe Direct. Join us again for the next programme. From me, Rachel Ellison, and the team here in Portugal, goodbye.